the absolute right to declare a national emergency. The lawyers have so advised me. I'm not prepared to do that yet, but if I have to, I will. Other presidents have used it, some fairly often. If this doesn't work out, probably I will do it. I would almost say definitely.
That, of course, more from the president this morning as he doubled down on the idea of declaring a national emergency so he can try to build that border wall without the consent of Congress. Now, CNN is reporting that White House attorneys are now working on a legal defense for the court challenge that, of course, will immediately follow an emergency declaration. A pretty good hint they're going to announce one. I believe they will. Now, in a moment, we will discuss the politics and the legalities of a possible emergency declaration with Congressman Sean Patrick Maloney, an attorney, and he also served as a senior advisor to President Bill Clinton, so he's got experience from the White House perspective. But first, let's get a little bit more background. For that, let's bring Andrew back in the conversation.
And Rich, let's begin with the legality of a possible Trump emergency declaration. There's a real split of opinion as to whether the courts would allow one to stand, though it is worth noting that Judge Andrew Napolitano, a Fox analyst who Trump likes to cite when he issues opinions that support the president, said this week that he thinks an emergency declaration over a border wall would not be legal. Now, emergency declarations are relatively new in American history, but a quick summary shows what President Trump is talking about doing is actually a lot different from the other such uses of declarations, even emergencies that Mr. Trump himself has declared. Now, the law allowing them only passed in 1976 and was only used for the first time in 1979 against the Iranian government that had taken our hostages. It's been used 58 times since then, and believe it or not, there are 31 national emergencies that still remain in effect to this day. Now, the vast majority of all of the emergencies that have ever been issued have been to penalize officials from enemy nations or key people and groups involved in specific conflicts. For example, sanctions against Iran or North Korea or Yemen or Sudan or Cuba and other countries, as well as people involved with and who support terror groups. That makes sense. Emergencies have also been declared in connection to specific issues and events, and this is the closest we get to today's focus. Presidents in the past have used emergencies to combat terrorism after 9/11, that makes sense, to stop the spread of nuclear weapons. Maybe the weakest one is this one, to stem the spread of so-called conflict diamonds from Sierra Leone. They've also issued them to combat things like the swine flu. And as it turns out, President Trump has already made 3 emergency declarations during his tenure. One was against human rights abusers, another to apply sanctions to groups and people who, and the irony here, used hacking and social media to influence American elections. And the third one he declared just 2 months ago that sanctioned the supporters of Nicaragua's President Daniel Ortega. Most emergency declarations are not controversial, and you often hear very little about them. After all, how many of you out there even knew about the declaration against Nicaragua back in November, an emergency? But the border wall is controversial, so it's worth revisiting similarly controversial immigration-related issue from the recent past. On June 15, 2012, President Obama announced his DACA plan. That's the plan that allows undocumented minors known as Dreamers to safely stay in the U.S. without fear of deportation. Obama did not declare a national emergency to do so. He just issued an executive order, one that President Trump has since reversed. But even given that lower level of executive action, listen to how some notable Republicans reacted. And we'll start with a man now himself very much invested in executive actions and emergencies.
You have to be able to lead. There is no leadership at the top. Signing executive orders is not the way our country was supposed to be run.
There's going to come another president, a Republican president, and if you have this power for the president to say, I don't agree with this tax law, this environmental law, this labor law, so I'm just going to change it, that threatens the liberty of every American. It ought to concern all of us, Republicans, Democrats, independents, or libertarians. That much power in the president's dangerous.
We did not elect a dictator. We elected a president.
These days, you hear all of these politicians, they're denouncing Barack Obama, saying, oh, he's a lawless, imperial president, and he ignores court orders and changes laws by fiat. There's only one remedy for a president who commits high crimes and misdemeanors, and it's impeachment. It's the I word.
When Obama did something less than what Trump is proposing, he was a dictator, and the only remedy was impeachment. Crickets from all of those people today.
Fascinating, Andrew. Thank you very much. And let's bring in our next guest, Democratic Congressman Sean Patrick Maloney. He represents New York's 18th Congressional District. Congressman, I'm just curious. I would love to have been a fly on the wall this morning. when the President of the United States said you and your party like violent criminals, gangs pouring over the border, and open borders overall. When you heard the President say that about you and your party, what'd you say?
Look, I'm not going to take the bait on a bunch of nonsense like that. I think there are too few adults in Washington. I plan to remain one of them.
Fair enough. He did hint, more than hint, he basically said if there wasn't a deal, and unless you see movement that I'm missing here, there doesn't seem to be one in the offing to get the government back open, that he was going to basically press the button and go for a declaration of a national emergency. For a moment, step out.
Right. Well,
what that would mean, and also beyond just today, what that would mean consequentially about taking one branch of government out of the equation.
Well, look, I think it's a declaration of personal weakness and failure is what it is. I mean, he may have technical authority to do that. His own party opposes it. I mean, talk to the recently former chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, Mac Thornberry, a rock-ribbed conservative Republican from Texas. He says don't raid military dollars to waste on some fantasy vanity project at the border. Look, if you go do that, by the way, you're going to take it out of building the barracks at West Point. I represent the United States Military Academy. They have been the largest construction project in the Army in recent years because we are taking care of the next generation of military officers. They're the ones he's going to screw if he does this stupid thing at the border with a declaration of emergency. And that's before you get to the constitutional concerns or the concerns about trying to bypass Congress. Look, there are easy compromises here. We've passed one as recently as a few days ago here in the House where we took the Republican bills from the Senate, which passed overwhelmingly and even unanimously in some cases, and we put them on the floor here and passed them. Those are the Republican bills, not the Democratic bills. We, the new Democratic majority, passed them over here in the House. The President could sign that tomorrow if they'd pass it again in the Senate. That's already a compromise. But a lot of us are serious about border security. There's a lot of work to do at our ports of entry where all the drugs come in. We could build more loading docks and inspect more trucks. We could use cell towers. We don't have enough. We need more roads. We need more drones. There's a lot we can do. And we could agree on independent, verifiable metrics around illegal border crossings so we knew we were really securing the border. But we also need to stop generating a humanitarian crisis by separating families, by treating asylum seekers like criminals. We need to stop the games and get serious. And we don't need to shut down the government to have that conversation in the first place. So we need to reopen this government, and we need to take seriously border security. We can do both.
But honestly, Congressman, you just articulated better than I've heard from Democratic leadership why you are for border security, and this is specifically what you would do about it. To the casual observer, they're just hearing Democratic leadership say, no, we're not going to basically be extorted to give the president $5.7 billion. We're not giving him money for his wall at the end of a gun. And in the end, that may be enough. But I'm hearing people anecdotally say, well, he wants to protect the country from people invading, and the Democrats are saying no. Are you concerned from a messaging standpoint the Democrats have to do a better job as to what they're for rather than what they're against?
Well, when you're wrestling with a demagogue, that's always going to be a problem, right? As the old saying goes, it's easier to get people to their feet than to get them to come to their senses. And the fact of the matter is that we have passed Republican-sponsored legislation that represents a compromise. We already passed $1.3 billion in border security. They haven't spent that yet. He would have had another 1.6 in this year's budget. That would get him to 2.9. And again, that's for the common sense stuff that the experts tell us is important, and we would do that tomorrow. As have a lot of his Republicans in the Senate already said, we can do all that. We also don't need to shut down the government. I'd do one more thing, by the way, Richard, which is that no member of Congress should get a paycheck while the government is closed. That's why I've told them not to give me mine. I'm not getting paid during the shutdown. So when I see those TSA agents out at White Plains Airport, I can say to them, I'm going through what you're going through. If more members of Congress felt the pain of this thing, maybe they'd start doing their jobs.
You worked in the Clinton administration. Give a little perspective, because I believe and I obviously could very well be wrong, but I believe the president will declare a national emergency. And there's some division among legal scholars as to whether or not, in fact, the courts will uphold it and in fact say that he has that within his purview. But to me, I think that there's a much bigger concern when he's gone from Washington that that's not what the intent was. We didn't intend to make a president basically above any checks and balances, that he can take money from wherever he wants and spend it however he wants without you guys in the House and Senate having a voice. Am I wrong to say this could be Pandora's box? If he gets his way on this, for presidents going forward, it'll change the whole dynamic.
Well, I don't think it's quite that serious. And the reason is because he would be declaring an emergency under certain congressional statutes that do give him certain authority in the case of genuine emergencies. Now, when he says it is and it clearly is not, that will go to court, and the court will make a determination about whether he's overstepped those boundaries. But remember, even a presidential declaration wouldn't allow him to do anything that the Constitution prohibits, and it wouldn't allow him to not do anything the Constitution requires, and Congress still has a job to do. The harshest critics of this declaration, by the way, are members of the Republican Party. Let me say that again. Republicans who believe this is an overreach of presidential authority and sets a very dangerous precedent, but also who care, like I do, about taking money out of West Point construction to build a vanity project on the border. This is an admission of failure by this president because he simply cannot sit down and work out what is a good faith compromise. Because really, Richard, what he wants is to continue to inflame a group of the population that he counts on for political support. It is irresponsible, it's wrong, and it will not fix the problem. And meanwhile, 800,000 workers are going without pay. 400,000 are on the job. 15,000 are from New York, by the way, and 20,000 people in my district who receive nutritional assistance, food stamps, have to wonder whether that's coming. Anybody who needs an SBA loan approved is worrying about that. We're going to start seeing problems throughout the federal government because of the length of this shutdown. None of that is necessary while we work out our differences on border security, and a bunch of us want to compromise. This is, even for this president, breaking new ground of irresponsibility, and people are rightly disgusted with it.
All right, Congressman, you got a busy week ahead of you. Hopefully, the government will open between now and then. Thank you for the time. And when we come back, everyone, the head of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, he'll join us to talk about what the president is doing to our allies and how he's cozying up to our enemies.